we're going to talk about some mandatory factors and general guidelines. First of all is quality over quantities, unless you are reading certain numbers of chapters or going through a number of questions. And make sure you start and meet on time or will be deducted from the volunteering hours. And don't force cameras except for musics. And it's very important for teacher and student communications. Make sure you are communicating with students, that knowing what they need. And screenshot and time recording is very, very important. This will keep track of your volunteering hour and everything else. So here are some acceptable screenshots. So where the topic, try to show the topics of the tutoring lesson and have the students and teachers like cameras on if they feel comfortable. So here are some additional helpful guidelines. So for some unresponsive students, or if they feel uncomfortable, like showing, like reading or showing things in front of other people, you could assign some asynchronous teaching. For example, make them record what they have learned, and be patient and take more time, because some students do need the time to process. And for some unresponsive students, make sure you balance between being polite and encouraging and firm. And you could also engage student by a little out of topic conversations, like a little story or little short videos to keep them interested. And lastly is have informal assessment only. Do not tell the student they are being assessed and do not think they're being tested.
Here are some general tips on reading and book discussions. I tend to read page by page and go around the circle, but it's up to you on whether or not you want to do another method. Some other methods could be reading every other paragraph depending on what book it is. I usually preview the chapter before class because it's important to know what you're teaching before you actually teach it. You should have a weekly schedule, but it depends on the book, and eventually you get a feel of how many chapters you want to be reading per class, and then create a schedule based off of that. I also use Google Documents to write down discussion questions at the end of each chapter, and I also make vocabulary lists. I like to quiz my students about what happened in the chapter and ask them what words mean. I found that making Quizlet Live or quizzes is a great way to keep them engaged in your questions. If you use Spark Notes or Quizlets that you didn't make, you should only be using them for questions and discussion and not relying on them. Many kids won't want to read the book either. In that case, they'll often make excuses like having to use the bathroom or asking to read the next page instead. You can let them make these excuses, but you should always remember that who has read the least and call on them so they can get their reading in as well. As a teacher, I read the pages too and include myself in the circle of reading. Every couple of chapters, you should do a recap. You can go over what's happening in the chapter and ask for any questions so you know that the kids know what's going on. Here are some general tips for teaching grammar and vocabulary. You should ask your students to read the prompt out loud. Not only does this encourage class participation, but it also helps improve pronunciation and reading comprehension. Again, remember to preview the chapter that you will be teaching that day beforehand, and create a list of the concepts covered and any challenging vocabulary to pay special attention to during the lesson. As a chapter review, you can use these concepts to judge how your students are doing. You can also ask them up front and they'll usually tell you. Make sure to ask your students whether they have any questions throughout the lesson. This is really important because sometimes, unless you ask them first, they'll be too shy to tell you. If you see the textbook giving repetitive questions, you can choose to skip some of them if you feel that the students already understand the topics, but you should definitely not be skipping too many questions. You can give informal vocabulary quizzes through interactive sites like Kahoot, Blooket, Quizlet, Quizzes, or more. You could also give your students writing assignments to assess their grammar and vocab proficiency. If you choose to do that, make sure to give lots of constructive feedback and detailed comments so they know exactly what to improve.
Here are some general guidelines and tips for teaching Chinese. First, discuss with parents about the goal for this class. This will usually involve reading stories or learning Chinese characters. Ask them what book they want to read. Usually, parents will prepare the PDF of the book. Make sure the students read, not you. Have them take turns by reading a page or a paragraph at a time. Make sure to correct them if they make mistakes. If they read too quickly, ask them to slow down. Please be patient. Some students read more slowly, are unwilling to read, or make several mistakes. Be nice, helpful, and provide plenty of guidance whenever needed. Providing recaps or summaries of the book can be helpful, especially for books that are very long.
As math is mostly problem-centric, the following tips will revolve around providing a smooth experience for tutors and students when solving math problems. One way to ensure that every student understands the problem is by utilizing the Zoom private chat function. This allows for you to see each student's proficiency with a certain concept. Another option is to have a student explain the problem to the class step by step. By doing so, the class will better understand the problem and you can make sure that the student knows what's going on. If the class is struggling with a problem, you can ask, "What should we do first?" or "What is the first step?" If a problem is particularly difficult for the class, you can also give more time to let them try and figure it out on their own. When you're giving an explanation, don't skip any steps or assume that the class knows how you arrived at a conclusion. Finally, if your entire class understands a concept very well, you can just skip over any questions that pertain to that concept. For instance, if everyone in your class understands how to find the area of a triangle, you can skip over any triangle area questions. If you are teaching social studies, here are some general tips that will help you. If you're teaching from a textbook, look or ask for a teacher's guide. If you will assign homework or any written classwork, creating and using Google Classroom will be very helpful. You must keep all personal views out of the class. Do not talk about the morality of what people did in the past. Be as objective as possible. The same goes for political standpoints and discussions. Don't impose your own beliefs on your students. If your students start discussing political matters relevant to the subject matter, make sure to use proper judgment and moderate the conversation, such that it doesn't go too far off topic or become too heated. Make sure to keep it civil. A lot of history involves discussions. If things get too far out of hand, you can utilize hand raising and mutes to keep everyone in check. Make preparations beforehand. Do a lot of research. Create a lesson plan. Have other things ready for students that complete classwork quickly, such as having them create a brief slideshow or unit review if they finish the work for the day. Do not presuppose what you are teaching is common knowledge. For example, don't assume your students know when the Third Reich was formed or who ruled Rome after Caligula.
If you're tutoring SAT prep, here are some general guidelines. First, ask for students' grade levels or ages, when they plan to take the SAT, and what math or English classes they have taken in school. This is just some background information so you can get an idea of where everyone is before you begin. Next, go over the test format. This is to give the students an idea of what to expect on test day. Have students do a diagnostic test on Khan Academy and set up SAT prep on Khan Academy. So to do this, you're just going to go to the Khan Academy drop-down menu. You're going to select SAT under test prep and then follow the directions to set up your SAT prep on Khan Academy. Make sure you balance between reading and writing and math and go over concepts or tests based on majority student request. In my experience, most people have more trouble with reading and writing than on math, but it varies from person to person. Suggest some tips or methods for getting through the sections, especially for reading, because there's lots of different strategies that people use, either to read the text faster, to answer the questions in an ideal order to maximize efficiency. There's a lot of ways, but don't force any certain method on anyone because everybody works differently. You should also recommend some prep books, but remember, quality over quantity. I especially recommend the SAT Black Book, especially for reading. Make sure you emphasize to the students that test prep and tutoring is useless without self-studying or putting in their own work. And lastly, I've left a link for a presentation I made, which I'd be happy to share with anyone who needs it. It's just a basic intro on how to prepare students for SAT prep. If you are working with students on anything related to music, if they're playing instruments, first ask for their grade, age level, and any future plans for auditions, music evaluations, repertoire, or more. This should happen before the first meeting because it's important to make sure you get some background information beforehand. You should also ask the student to send or tell you repertoire or music beforehand so you can look over and prepare for the first session, because you should know what they're intending to play. You should find this out before the first meeting as well. Make sure students' cameras are always on for teaching instruments. This is very important because there's no way for you to accurately judge someone playing an instrument without seeing them. Students learning instruments are not just here to learn how to play pieces. You should be teaching them scales, sight reading, and other fundamentals as well to help them build up their music skills. And for music theory, start with basics like reading notes or stats, and then slowly build up preparing some questions beforehand from online or other resources. If you're tutoring science, here are some general guidelines. First, have kids read page by page from the science help books that will be provided. Summarize points and allow for questions after each page is read. This is primarily to make sure students are paying attention as you go along, as it's very easy to get distracted during online learning. You can recap with Kahoots or quizzes near the end of every session. Crash course videos are great resources for all science topics. Go on YouTube, look up crash course followed by the name of the science topic, and more likely than not, a relevant video or many relevant videos will pop up. PHET Lab may also be a helpful resource. Here's what new tutors can expect from the evaluation system. New tutors will be randomly evaluated by committee members or experienced tutors every couple of sessions in the beginning. All evaluators will provide the new tutors with tips for improvement. Evaluators will have private conversations with tutors who are performing poorly. More chances will be given. The evaluator will fill out the informal rubric after observing tutors for 2 to 3 weeks. Finally, please understand that the evaluation system is a work in progress and is subject to change as we move along.